Something extremely unusual happened this morning, and almost no one is talking about the real implications yet. Because, as of March 16th, 2026, the President of the United States personally contacted 7 allied nations and asked them to send warships to one of the most dangerous waterways on Earth. But what happened next shocked Washington, because every single one of those allies said no, publicly, clearly, and on the record. That kind of unified refusal almost never happens in global politics, especially when the request is coming from the United States. So the real mystery is not just the rejection. The real mystery is why America's closest allies suddenly decided it was safer to refuse than to help. Trump first posted on Truth Social calling on countries like China, France, Japan, South Korea, and the United Kingdom to deploy naval forces to the Strait of Hormuz. The expectation inside Washington seemed obvious. Allies would line up quickly and support the mission. But hours passed, and no country responded with a yes. Instead, silence spread across the alliance network, and that silence carried a message louder than any official statement. Because when the world's most powerful military asks for help and receives nothing back, something deeper is happening behind the scenes. When the online post failed to generate support, Trump escalated the pressure. In an interview with the Financial Times, he warned that refusing the request would be very bad for the future of NATO. That statement was not just diplomacy. It sounded like a warning directed at the entire alliance system. Yet even that pressure failed to move anyone. And at that moment, the situation began to shift from a diplomatic request into something much more serious. The next voice to speak was the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Mike Waltz. And the language he used changed the entire tone of the situation. He said the United States welcomes, encourages, and even demands allied participation. That phrasing matters because it no longer sounded like a partner asking for help. It sounded like a government that might be running out of options. Then the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, added another layer to the pressure. She told reporters that these nations should contribute because they are, in her exact words, benefiting greatly from the United States military taking out the threat of Iran. In simple terms, the message was clear. America started the fight, but now it wants allies to help defend the consequences. The expectation was that someone would step forward. But again, nobody did. Not only did the original 7 nations refuse, but several others rejected the idea before they were even asked. Germany, Greece, Italy, and Spain all issued statements making it clear they would not participate. That means this was not just hesitation. It was a coordinated wave of refusals spreading across multiple capitals. And that raises an even bigger question. What exactly is happening inside the alliance that caused such a unified rejection? Because when alliances fracture, they rarely do it all at once. Usually it happens slowly, through quiet disagreements and diplomatic tension. But what we are seeing right now looks different. This looks like something structural, something deeper inside the foundation of the alliance system. And to understand it, we need to look at how each country responded. The British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, held a press conference early this morning, and his message was calm but firm. He said the United Kingdom will not be drawn into the wider war. He also emphasized something very important. This was never designed to be a NATO mission. That single statement quietly separated Britain from Washington's plan. Trump did not take that response well. In fact, he publicly mocked Starmer for saying he needed to consult his cabinet before making a decision. Trump responded with a line that shocked many diplomats watching the exchange. He said, "You don't need to meet with your team. You are the prime minister." And suddenly the conversation shifted from strategy to personal confrontation between allies. Germany responded next, and their answer was even shorter. Defense Minister Boris Pistorius delivered a message that contained just 7 words. "This is not our war. We did not start it." 7 words, but they carried enormous weight across Europe. Because Germany rarely speaks that bluntly about American military operations, France took a slightly more diplomatic tone. President Emmanuel Macron mentioned the possibility of helping in the future when circumstances permit, but the key detail was hidden inside that sentence. The circumstances he is waiting for are the end of the fighting, which effectively means France has agreed to nothing during the only moment that matters. Canada quietly declined as well. Australia signaled that it had not even received a formal request and was not preparing support. Japan said it was reviewing the situation within the limits of its constitution. Greece said no directly. Italy insisted diplomacy must come first. Spain delivered perhaps the strongest rejection of all. Defense Minister Margarita Robles said Spain would never accept temporary military measures and that the war must end immediately. That statement closed the door completely. No ambiguity, no room for negotiation. Then the European Union itself stepped in. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas gathered ministers in Brussels to discuss Washington's request. After the meeting, her conclusion was simple and clear. No European nation wants to actively participate in this war. Zero commitments, zero ships. Consultation. In the days before February 28th, Trump reportedly told Gulf allies the operation would end in just 4 days. Total capitulation from Iran was the expectation. His economic advisor, Kevin Hassett, even suggested the conflict might last only 4 to 6 weeks. But reality quickly moved in a different direction. Israel's own military later confirmed the war would continue for at least 3 more weeks. That contradiction created serious doubts among allies. European officials began asking the same question repeatedly. What exactly is the strategy here? What is the timeline? And most importantly, how does this war end? Estonia's foreign minister summarized the frustration in one simple sentence. What is the plan? And according to multiple reports, that question has not been answered clearly. Without a clear endgame, sending warships becomes a gamble, and governments rarely gamble with their own fleets. But the second reason goes even deeper than strategy. It has to do with the relationship between Trump and these allies. For years, he targeted many of the same countries with tariffs, threats, and public criticism. He called NATO obsolete, withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal, and imposed trade penalties on European industries. Those tensions did not disappear overnight. So when Washington suddenly needed military support, the request arrived with a complicated history attached to it. Instead of asking gently, the administration warned of consequences. Trump told reporters the United States would remember who refused. But warnings are not the same as leadership, and every government on that call list understood the difference. The third reason is domestic politics. European voters overwhelmingly oppose entering this conflict. Energy prices across the continent are already extremely sensitive. And the moment the Strait of Hormuz crisis began, oil prices surged past $100 per barrel. Petrol prices started rising in nearly every EU country. Natural gas markets also reacted instantly. Much of Europe's LNG supply travels through the same narrow waterway, now under threat. That means sending warships into the Gulf could trigger even more economic pain at home. And for many politicians, that could end their careers overnight. So the political calculation became unavoidable. But there's an even deeper layer that angered European officials. This war is indirectly strengthening Russia's economy. As oil prices rise above $70 per barrel, Moscow earns billions more in revenue. That money supports Russia's war effort in Ukraine. And NATO's main strategic focus is still Russia. So from Europe's perspective, something looks contradictory. Washington is asking them to send ships to the Persian Gulf. Yet rising oil prices from that same war are helping fund Russia. The contradiction is not subtle, and Brussels has noticed. Now let's talk about geography, because the Strait of Hormuz itself changes everything. At its narrowest point, it is only 21 nautical miles wide. Iran controls the mountainous northern coastline overlooking the shipping lanes. For decades, Iran has prepared defensive systems there. Mines, missiles, drones, fast boats, submarines, a layered strategy designed for exactly this scenario. The U.S. Navy has already reported destroying 16 Iranian mine-laying vessels near the strait. That alone shows how quickly an escort mission could become open combat. And naval analysts warn reopening the strait during active conflict would be extremely difficult, even for the most powerful navies on Earth. Which brings us to a recent example that every defense ministry remembers, the Red Sea crisis. Houthi militants managed to disrupt global shipping with far fewer capabilities than Iran. Multiple airstrikes were launched against them, yet the disruption never fully stopped, and the Red Sea was never completely secured. Military planners watched that situation carefully, and they drew a simple conclusion. If the U.S. Navy struggled to secure the Red Sea against a militia, then securing the Strait of Hormuz against Iran's Revolutionary Guard could be far harder. And that realization changes every strategic calculation. But here is the most overlooked development in the entire crisis. Iran is not simply closing the strait. Iran is controlling who gets to use it. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi explained this clearly in a recent interview. The strait is only closed to American, Israeli, and Allied vessels. Other ships are still allowed to pass, and Iran has already demonstrated that policy in action. A Pakistani-flagged tanker passed through carrying Abu Dhabi crude. Indian LPG carriers also crossed safely. A Turkish vessel received clearance as well. China is reportedly negotiating guaranteed passage for its energy shipments. France and the United Kingdom have quietly opened back-channel talks. And suddenly, every government faces a choice. Join the American convoy mission and risk becoming a target, or negotiate directly with Iran and keep trade flowing. That strategy is incredibly powerful because it turns the strait into a diplomatic filter. Countries that cooperate with Washington face confrontation. Countries that cooperate with Iran keep their oil moving. And for many governments, the decision becomes obvious. In other words, Iran has transformed a military choke point into a political lever. Every negotiation with Tehran quietly pulls another country away from Washington's leadership. The alliance is not simply failing to form, it is slowly being pulled apart. And the global economy is feeling the shock. Before the conflict began, about 138 ships passed through the strait every day. Now that number has fallen to fewer than 5. Oil exports have dropped below 10% of normal levels. Brent crude surged above $100 and even touched $120, and emergency reserves are being released worldwide. The International Energy Agency has announced the largest reserve release in history, 400 million barrels across dozens of nations. The United States alone is releasing 172 million barrels from its strategic reserve. That is roughly 41% of its emergency stockpile. Yet prices continue rising. Iraq's oil production has fallen dramatically. Kuwait has cut output. Saudi Arabia is rerouting shipments through alternate pipelines. But none of these solutions can replace the strait. The global deficit now stands near 12 million barrels per day, and the consequences go beyond oil. Global LNG supply has dropped nearly 20%. Fertilizer shipments are delayed. Helium and uranium transport is disrupted. Even aviation hubs across the Gulf are feeling the pressure. At the same time, other regions are heating up. North Korea recently launched ballistic missiles during military drills. China has increased activity around Taiwan, and analysts say Beijing is watching this conflict closely, not to intervene, but to learn. So step back and look at the full picture. The original expectation was simple: a quick 4-day victory and full Allied support. The reality 3 weeks later looks completely different. The strait remains under Iranian influence. Oil prices are surging. Emergency reserves are draining. Allies are refusing to send ships. Some are negotiating directly with Tehran instead, and the global system is adjusting in real time. Which raises one final question. Who will decide the next phase of this conflict? Washington? Tehran? Or the Allied governments that have just told the world's most powerful military that it may have to face this crisis alone? Because the answer to that question could reshape global alliances for years to come. Thanks for watching Market Mindset. If you found this breakdown interesting, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next analysis. Like the video, share it with others who follow global politics. Let's get the conversation going. Drop your opinion in the comments. Who do you think is actually gaining the advantage in this crisis? And what do you think will happen next in the Strait of Hormuz?